How does one feed 10 billion people? I wouldn't know. I'm not a scientist, so. So the world already makes enough food to feed 10 billion people. The problem is the distribution of it. About 60% of food produced in Canada is wasted yearly, not to mention the impacts of large-scale farming on the environment. People aren't getting enough nutrient-dense food, and the people who are getting it are over-consuming it. There's a better way to do things, and it involves streamlined farming techniques and more sustainable food use. Personally, I would kill half the population and feed it to the other half, but cannibalism isn't exactly ethical, so yeah, I guess that'll have to do. Okay, so to start, let's talk about GMOs, genetically modified organisms. A lot of this plan ties back to the use of GMOs. We have the technology at our disposal to genetically modify plants to be resistant to disease, to have higher nutrient density, and to produce more crops. By splicing traits from one plant's DNA into another, we, either through selective breeding or genome editing, we allow for the most desirable outcome of the produce selected. Modified crops have some issues though. One of them is they really affect the natural plants. Like when you introduce a new guy into the ecosystem, they're not big fans. And part of that is because they allow for more highly developed strains of diseases and highly developed strains of pests. So now other plants are dying and you got stronger stuff that's killing everything. And also they're possibly linked to cancer. I don't know about you, I like my cells where they are right now, but you can do you, man. That's all you. I think GMOs play a big part in sustainable food production as we can ensure people are receiving the right amount of nutrients in the food they consume, without having to consume that much of it. Preventing malnutrition is the biggest concern. That's when cells don't receive enough nutrients they require to do stuff like build proteins, create ATP energy, maintain cellular growth. That's a key factor in feeding 10 billion people. It's not the amount of food and more, meeting the macro and micronutrient requirements to live. So how do we get this nutrient-rich food? Easily and without the heavy land costs? Vertical farming, urban homesteading, community gardens, and heavily plant-based diets. I'll go through each one here individually, starting with vertical farming. Okay, so instead of growing plants in a bunch of long lines on big swaths of land, what if we stack them on top of each other and put them in a warehouse? Vertical farming is that. You are growing plants vertically instead of horizontally. That's crazy. You grow them in simulated environments. It's a form of controlled environment agriculture, or CEA. It refers to things like hydroponics, where vertical farming usually falls, aeroponics, aquaculture, aquaponics, greenhouses. Basically, if it's not grown in a natural environment and you control the environment as the people, it's a CEA. Vertical farming in the sense is great because if the environment is controlled and monitored by humans, we don't have to worry about modifying plants to survive certain climates, and it allows for year-round crop growth, and prevents GMOs from affecting pre-existing ecosystems. Very cool. We're okay. This is often done through hydroponics and LED lights to maximize plant growth. Some plants grow better with certain light spectrums. LED lights provide a range of light spectrums like red, blue, green to accelerate plant growth regardless of light preference. Hydroponics is when instead of soil, plants are grown in water with added nutrients. This system is really effective because the solutions added to the water guarantee the plants uptake the right amount of nutrients every time, and also prevents the plants from getting any soil-based diseases, and it can manage pH balance to the pH balance of the soil for specific plant types. The biggest problem with vertical farming is the high maintenance, high investment, and high energy cost. These vertical farms can provide a lot of crops to feed people at the cost of a lot of energy. You need the money and the resources to make it work, and you need people willing to put in the investments. Although lots of vertical farms are using solar energy to power these facilities, so they minimize the energy required, vertical farming can also be used to grow GMOs, so it's up to you to weigh the pros and cons. Personally, I think the solutions it provides far outweigh the problems it has, but to each their own. Moving on to urban homesteading and community gardens. These two kind of go hand in hand since the main focus is moving agriculture to cities. By the time we reach 10 billion people, most of the population will be living in cities, so moving agriculture to urban areas is very important. Urban agriculture usually involves things like at-home box gardens, community gardens, open to the public. These are great for a lot of reasons. Not only does it promote a community involvement, goodness gracious, it also provides nutritious food for everyone in the community, once again, without the big land cost. It also prevents a lot of food waste as people can grow what they need individually and start community compost areas for more nutrient-dense soil. This is because the nitrogen in decomposing stuff gets into the soil, and plants really like nitrogen. They're really... You feel? These gardens also encourage biodiversity and don't often intercept native plant growth, as it can be controlled by the cities. And because of the small growing areas, pesticides don't need to be used in such high quantities like they would be in large fields. This is big because pesticides in large quantities can disrupt the endocrine system, such as glyphosate, which blocks testosterone receptors or causes issues with the nervous system. Endocrine system or DNA replication. The thing about doing farming like this is switching the majority of the population to a more plant-based diet. I'm not talking like full veganism, just reducing the amount of meat we eat, because the overconsumption of meats has a lot of environmental impacts and a lot of physical impacts. Not only does the surplus of land required to house animals cause disruptions in the environment because of the amount of CO2 produced, but you also need more land to feed those animals. It just becomes a whole virtuous cycle. Per day, we only really need to consume about 70 grams of meat. Only about 10 to 35% of your daily diet should be protein, and that's not considering proteins from things like eggs, spinach, broccoli. It's more common for meat to be overconsumed, causing things like high cholesterol, high risk of heart disease, among other things. It's very possible for people to consume their daily required macro and micronutrients from mostly plant-based diet as well, so it's not like we really have to worry about lack of meat consumption adding to malnutrition. Now, there's a problem with urban farming as much as any farming, and that's the environment and seasonal crop growth, as well as the continuous effort of maintaining these farms. Certain plants can't grow in too hot or too cold environments. Either water can't be retained in them, rendering them unable to photosynthesize, or the cells freeze and can't meet the energy requirements to acclimate to new temperatures. Also, if the community is uncommitted to maintaining these farms and ways of life, they fall into disrepair, and it could spread diseases to the plants in the surrounding area, as well as just making cities dirtier. Maintaining water is also difficult, as concrete sidewalks and streets create these seals, preventing water from diffusing into the soil when it rains. That's why flooding in urban areas is such a big issue. But community gardens do provide a bit of a solution to this, as they now open up the soil. So it's a bit of a win-win situation. So in conclusion, feeding 10 billion people is not an easy task, and it requires a community-oriented approach focused on creating enough nutrient-rich food to not just feed people, but prevent malnourishment. We already have plenty of solutions to help this issue. It's streamlining and investing in them that makes this plan feasible. But, you know, cannibalism is always a backup plan. That's all I'm saying. Exponential growth is a little unsustainable. It's a little silly. We could just eat each other. It would work.